Well, today is Father's Day, and so we want to wish all those fathers a happy Father's Day and to wish you that the most special day that you could ever have in this year. But I would ask you this morning to open your Bibles to 1 Kings chapter 2. And even though this sermon is really about fathers, I pray that all of us would be able to gain something from it as well. Now, all of us should have the desire to be good fathers or even good mothers to our children. And the Bible is for sure to help us to become really great fathers and to become great mothers as well. We can read about some individuals that we find that God had praised them because of their willingness and their desire to do what is expected to be done in the home. And we can appreciate that. You know, David was a mighty man. He was the second king of Israel. David was a man who had battles and blessings in his life. David was a man who sometimes was on the mountaintop of glory, but then other times, sometimes in the valley of defeat. And sometimes he enjoyed great blessings because of his children, but sometimes great heartache as well because of his children. And if you study the life of David, you will see that he endured many great trials, similar to some of the trials that we might often face in this life as well. David was a man who sometimes sinned, but yet the Bible also says that David was a man who was after God's own heart. And despite his mistakes, despite his sins, even as a father, he never lost his trust in God. He kept the focus where it ought to be. But David also came to the point in time where it was that he was about to depart from this life. And we read about that in 1 Kings chapter 2. But before he died, he gave his final charge to his son, Solomon, the son of Bathsheba. In verse 1, notice again, now the days of David drew nigh that he should die, and he charged Solomon his son, saying, I go the way of all the earth, be thou strong therefore, and show thyself a man. And keep the charge of the Lord thy God, to walk in his ways, to keep his statutes and his commandments, and his judgments and his testimonies, as it is written in the law of Moses, that thou mayest prosper in all that thou doest, and whithersoever thou turnest thyself. 1 Kings 2, 1 through 3. What do we learn from David's charge to Solomon that can help us to become better fathers? What do we need to be saying to our children? How do we instruct them? What would be our final charge as a faithful father? What would be our final charge to maybe our sons or our daughters, to our children? Notice first that David says, face this fact. What is that fact? Well, verse 2, he says, I go the way of all the earth. In other words, death is certain, Solomon. It will happen to all of us at one time or another. We are born into a world of uncertainties. A person is born into a particular home. The parents may be good, the parents may be bad. A person may be born into a home with great wealth, or it may be a poverty-stricken home. A child may be born healthy, or a child may be born sick. A child may receive a good education, or he may not receive a good education in life. But one could quickly rise to the top of the corporate ladder, and then as quickly rose, now fall from the peak of success. People marry, people divorce. Children may cause your heart to swell, but they also may cause your heart to ache. You see, life is uncertain. People sometimes suffer an accident and are paralyzed for life. Life is filled with uncertainties. But here's a fundamental fact. Every one of us must die and then face the judgment, Hebrews 9:27. We know that's going to happen. We may not know what's going to happen tomorrow or next week or next year, but we do know that death is certain for sure. Wherefore, as by one man sin entered into the world, and death by sin, and so death passed upon all men, for that all have sinned. Romans 5:12. You read Genesis chapter 5, and in that genealogy there that's listed, you will read about Adam's descendants, all the way up to Noah, who lived almost a millennium upon this earth. But it is hard to imagine, hard to understand or comprehend of them living that long at that particular time. But as you're reading Genesis 5, you're going to find that after it says how long they lived, it will then say, and he died. Those three words are after every one of those people that we read about in the length of their days here on this earth, years here on this earth, and they died. Solomon learned from David to face this very fundamental fact. That fundamental fact is that we go all the way of all the earth and we die. Parents who try to keep their young people away from the reality of death really do their young people a great disservice. They need to understand that as there is life, there is also death as well. Some people may develop some very unhealthy ideas about death. And so we need to teach them the very aspects of death. That's why we need to help them understand what death is like from the biblical perspective. Therefore, they will understand death in a very healthy way. Young people grieve. Young people grieve, and therefore they must be allowed to express their emotions when they lose their loved one. We need to be willing to talk to them and help them to understand this process called death. David says to Solomon here, I go the way of all the earth, be thou strong therefore, and show thyself a man. I'm going to travel the path that those before me have already traveled. I have spoken about the valley of the shadow of death, Psalm 23, verse 4. I'm going to travel through that valley now. And how does he know this? He knows this because his body is telling him so. His health is failing. He has become an old man. He is in decline and death nears. Have you ever considered that these two that I'm talking about this morning, David and Solomon, had actually wrote so much about sickness and death? When you read through the book of Psalms, a book of biblical poetry, mostly written by David, and there he wrote a lot about these particular subjects. Study wisdom literature that was recorded primarily by Solomon and from the pen of David. From these two men, we find that they learn about life, but they also learn about this thing called death as well. What is David experiencing as he gives his final admonition to his son Solomon? We talked about recently about what was written in Ecclesiastes chapter 12 by Solomon. And Solomon talked about old age. And when I read Ecclesiastes chapter 12, and I hear Solomon talking about old age, I'm reminded that David told him that the day will come when you too will go the way of all the earth and die. In Ecclesiastes chapter 12, verses 1 and 2, he says, remember now thy Creator in the days of thy youth, while the evil days come not, nor the years draw nigh, when thou shalt say, I have no pleasure in them. While the sun or the light or the moon or the stars be not darkened, nor the clouds return after the rain. There is a point a person reaches in life when he says that a future is really not so bright anymore. It's not so bright anymore. I'm not to be here that much longer. And the plans that I once had there's no reason for me to now make those plans. If I did not accomplish them of what I desired at that time, there is no need for me to try to accomplish them even now. I have gotten old. And it seems that when you get over one problem or one ailment, as I've been getting older each year, and you've been getting older each year, just as soon as you get over one problem and one ailment, then comes another, right? Ecclesiastes 12 and verse 3. He says, in the day when the keepers of the house shall tremble, in other words, I shake more now than I used to, the old man says. And the strong men shall bow themselves. At one time I stood erect. Now I'm bent over because of my age. And the grinders cease because they are few. I don't have enough teeth anymore as I used to eat. And those that look out of the windows be darkened. I can't be able to see quite as far as I used to see. In verse 4, and the doors shall be shut in the streets when the sound of the grinding is low, and shall rise up at the voice of the bird. I can't sleep as long anymore. And all the daughters of music shall be brought low, verse 5. Also when they shall be afraid of that which is high, the sun will climb up there and get that for me. No, sun, will you climb up there and get that for me? Because I can't reach it anymore. Desire shall fail because man goeth to his long home, and the mourners go about the streets. I just don't eat anymore. I don't feel like doing anything anymore. Why is all this happening? Why is it happening? Because the man is going to his everlasting home. He's getting ready to die. And that's what David is saying to Solomon here in 1 Kings chapter 2. Son, I'm going all the way of all the earth, and I want you to understand this fundamental fact that death is a reality. And before you know it, Solomon, you will be lying on your deathbed. So face this fundamental fact. Solomon understood, number 2, the brevity of life. Life is even a vapor, James tells us, that appeareth for a little time and then vanisheth away. James 4:14. Understand the brevity of life, and not only that, understand the burdens of life. Man that is born of a woman is of few days and full of trouble. Job reminds us in Job 14 and verse 1. And so David is giving his final admonition here, his final charge to his son Solomon. And he says this, I want you to know that I go the way of all the earth, that there is something certain that all of us have to face, and it's death. Somebody says, well, that's morbid, that's depressing on Father's Day. Friends, we need to understand something. You'll never know how to live until you know how to die. That's a fundamental fact, right? And we need to teach our children how to live, but we must first teach them how to die, because death is a reality. Death is certain. Now, what else does David say to Solomon? Not only does he state this fundamental fact, but he also says you need to fix your focus. Fix your focus. Face this fact, then fix your focus. Look again at 1 Kings 2 and verse 2. He says, I go the way of all the earth. Be thou strong therefore, and show thyself a man. Where does he need to focus his attention? On being a man. Death is coming to me, David said, and it will come to you, Solomon, sooner than you think. Therefore, you need to grow up and be a man. And as a general rule, boys becoming men depend on their fathers. And ye fathers, provoke not your children to wrath, but bring them up in the nurture and the admonition of the Lord. Ephesians 6:4. What's happening? You are rearing a boy, but you're training him to become a man. You are bringing him up, but somebody says it's natural that all boys become men. No, they don't. No, they don't. Oh, I understand boys will become taller. They take a lot of pride when something starts growing on the face. I understand that the voice starts to change. That does not make a man. All you really have is just an overgrown boy, and an overgrown boy can be very dangerous to our society. If a boy is not being taught how to become a man, that becomes a dangerous thing, because oftentimes that boy becomes dependent. He can do a lot of damage. It's dangerous. So remember, David says to Solomon, "Be thou strong, therefore, and show thyself a man." Notice, first of all, that can be done through identification. We need to help our sons identify who they are. Train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. We need to help our sons identify just who they are. The world is trying to, in our society, to suppress gender roles. That's a huge mistake. Our boys and our girls, as a result of this, have become socially and morally and sexually confused, all because we are trying to suppress gender roles. That is, we are trying to make them genderless, as if there is no difference whatsoever between boys and girls. I don't buy into that. And you need not to buy into that as moms and dads and grandparents. God made boys and girls different. Now we hear this language of a man is trying to get in touch with his feminine side. I'm sorry, he don't have a feminine side. God never gave him that. God did not create he women, she men, by the way. God made men, women, boys, and girls, and we are different. Just think for a moment, little boys, little girls, put them in a room filled with toys. The girls are going to go to the dolls. The boys are going to go to the trucks, the cars. That's the way God made them. Little boys like toy pistols, trucks, cars, and balls. Little girls, on the other hand, like the dolls and the dresses and the kitchen sets. Sometimes these girls even engage in role playing. One will play the mom and the other plays the baby. It's role playing. It's all right. It's fine, because it's okay to be a wife, to be a mother. They're designed by God to be a mother one day, to be women. You think about how boys and girls carry their books. The boys carry their books by their side, and they're swinging it up and back and forth. The girls, they carry their books by their chest, like as if they're holding a baby. It just comes naturally. Dr. James Dobson saw what was happening to our boys and that it was frightening, and so he wrote a book, Bringing Up Boys. And I would recommend for fathers to read that book. Identification. Identification, that's what David said to Solomon. Be thou strong and show thyself a man. But along with identification is expectation. David says, I want you to understand who you are, but I also want you to know what I expect of you. Be thou strong, therefore, and show thyself a man. Paul says in 1 Corinthians 16:13, quit you like men, be strong. David says to Solomon, I expect you to behave like a man to accomplish what a man ought to accomplish. What does that mean? That means we need men who can lead. Men who can lead. When you study the Bible, you'll find that God expects men to be the leaders. And when a society does not respect that, then that society's days are numbered. The Bible addresses this. Isaiah had something even to say about this. And I want you to notice these passages. And if you want, put these verses down. For example, Isaiah 3 and verse 12, where God is not pleased by what he sees. And here's what he says. As for my people, children are their oppressors, and women rule over them. What's the problem here? Men are not taking the leadership as God had dictated, had desired. Put this passage down, Isaiah 19:16. In that day shall Egypt be like unto women, and it shall be afraid and fear because of the shaking of the hand of the Lord of hosts, which he shaketh over it. Isaiah 19:16. Is God condemning women? No. He's not condemning women. In that passage, when he said, in that day Egypt shall be like women, what he's saying is that Egypt will become soft. They'll become tender. They will be able to overrun Egypt because they will be like women. Remember what Peter said? Likewise, ye husbands, dwell with them according to knowledge, giving honor unto his wife, as unto the weaker vessel, 1 Peter 3:7. The Bible is clear that men are to lead. We don't see that today, and there would never have been this feminist movement. Never would have been if men had been leaders at that time. But then men are to love. What do little boys need from dad? Well, the same things that little girls need from their dad as well. And that's a lot of love and a lot of attention. Love in conversation, love in participation. You remember the story about the little boy who said, Dad, let us go out and play catch. He says, I'll throw the ball, you catch, and you say, good boy. Great job. That's what little boys want to hear from their dad. But not only men who lead and men who love, but men who know how to live. There are so many men today who are dependent upon drugs. They have allowed those drugs to become their idol. Men today who are dependent upon mom and daddy to always pay their way. Men today who are always dependent upon the government or upon the church to bail them out of some particular situation. Men who are running from responsibility and instead of accepting responsibility. Leaving wives, leaving children behind. David has a word for such men. Get up and go to work. Life is not always easy. It's not always fair. But nobody owes you anything. So get up and start complaining and be a man. Isn't that what David's saying to Solomon here? I go the way of all the earth. I'm not going to be here anymore. I'm not going to be around to help you. Be thou strong, therefore, and show thyself a man. And so David says you need to face the fact. Death is certain. It's granted. But then on the other hand, not only must you face the fact, but you need to fix your focus. And then number 3, he answers the question, how do you do that? And so he gives him a formula for faithfulness. Even in his old age, even near death, he gives him a formula for faithfulness. Go back to 1 Kings chapter 2. Look at verse 3, if you will, with me. And keep the charge of the Lord thy God to walk in his ways and to keep his statutes and his commandments and his judgments and his testimonies, as it is written in the law of Moses, that thou mayest prosper in all that thou doest and whithersoever thou turnest thyself. There is the formula for faithfulness. Man, you see, is more than just a few years here upon earth. And then it's all over with. No. Man possesses a living soul. Man is created in the very image of God, Genesis 1:26 and 27. He will live forever. He can no longer cease to exist any more than God himself could cease to exist, being made in his image. And so David says, God has given a proclamation. He's given a promise here. The proclamation is found in his word. And when his word is followed, there is a promise made. I hear so oftentimes that everything that happens, it just happens for a reason. Have you ever heard that? Everything that happens always just happens for a reason. Well, whatever bad is happening in my life, then I know it's happening for a reason. I've heard that many times. There must be a reason behind it, and God intended it for it to happen, that everything has a reason. Well, that's the core of Calvinistic thinking. It dominates most Protestant denominationalism. Everything has a reason, and God is behind it. Listen, everything does not happen for a reason. Life doesn't just happen. Things happen in life because life is complex. Life is filled with uncertainties. And because of the choices that we make, we find ourselves in certain situations that we may not like. The choices that other people may make sometimes puts us in those situations that we don't like. Sometimes life just throws us a curve, and that's just the way it is. It's not fair. It doesn't always make sense. You are where you are today because of the choices that you made earlier in life. But God says this, whatever your situation is in life, if you will just follow the principles that I give you, I can make you this promise. Everything will work out all right. That's the promise he makes. But keep in mind that the only way that promise can be fulfilled is if I heed the proclamation. As we know that all things work together for good to them that love God, to them who are the called according to his purpose, Romans 8:28, and I love that verse. It just doesn't happen, does it? No. That is when we take hold of God's principles and apply them to our particular situations in life, we then are able to prosper. And so when man faces trials, what does he do? He usually will approach these trials in one of three ways. Solomon tried all three of them. Of course, you knew that, didn't you? First thing is revelry. Well, you know, everything just happens. It's supposed to happen. There's a reason behind it all. I can't control it, and so I will not take life too seriously. I will do my own thing. That's revelry. That's what Solomon tried. Wine, women, wantonness, wealth. But none of it satisfied him. None of it. And then he turns to resentment. Many people do the same thing today. What is he saying? All is vanity. Might as well just go home and close the curtains and just sit down and have a pity party. Anybody want to have it with me? Life has not been good to me. He did that for a while, Solomon did. But then you could consider this, not revelry or resentment, but when trials come, how about renewal? This is a time for me to be renewed. Finally got to the point where Solomon said, I remember what my dad said. I remember that final charge when he said that I go the way of all the earth. Be thou strong, therefore, and show thyself a man, and keep the charge of the Lord or thy God to walk in his ways and his commandments, to keep his statutes, his judgments, and his testimonies. Listen to God's proclamation and accept his promise. You remember what Solomon said in Ecclesiastes 12:13? Here it is. Fear God and keep his commandments. What Solomon said right there in that verse was the same thing that David said, but just in fewer words. Solomon finally got it. And then Solomon wrote to his son to say the same thing. Fear God and keep his commandments. That's the only thing that really does make sense. What did David do when he gave the final charge to Solomon? He says, I want you to face this fact, and once you've accepted the fact that death is certain, he says, I want you to fix your focus and be a man. And how can you fix your focus and be a man? He says, I'm going to give you a formula for faithfulness. Listen to God's proclamation, heed it, and the promise will follow. Good, wise words from a man who was about to die, given to his son. Ye fathers who are with us today or watching online, your final charge to your son or your daughters before you die should be fear God and keep his commandments. Be thou strong, therefore, and show thyself a man, or for the girls, a woman, to keep the statutes, the commandments, the testimony, the judgments, if you're subject to heaven's invitation this morning, then we urge you to come to the Lord in his appointed way to become a Christian. Penitent believers must confess Jesus as the Son of God and be baptized for the remission